Rhian, daughter of Beleg, was the wife of Rudh, son of Galdor, and she was wedded to him 2 months before he went with Turin, his brother, to the near Neath or Nordiad. When no tidings came of her lord, she fled into the wild, but she was aided by the grey elves of Mithrim, and when her son Tuor was born they fostered him. Then Rhian departed from Hithlum, and going to the Haud en Dingin, she laid herself down upon it, and died. Morwen, daughter of Baragund, was the wife of Hurin, lord of Dor-Lumen, and their son was Turin, who was born in the year that Beren Erkemian came upon Luthien in the forest of Neldreth. A daughter they had also who was called Leliath, which is laughter, and she was beloved by Turin her brother. But when she was 3 old, there came a pestilence to Hithlum, born on an evil wind out of Engband, and she died. Now after the near Neath or Nordiad, Morwen abode still in Dor-Lumen, for Turin was but 8 years old, and she was again with child. Those days were evil, for the Easterlings that came into Hithlum despised the remnant of the people of Hador, and they oppressed them, and took their lands and their goods, and enslaved their children. But so great was the beauty and majesty of the Lady of Dor-Lumen, that the Easterlings were afraid, and dared not to lay hands upon her or her household, and they whispered among themselves, saying that she was perilous, and a witch skilled in magic, and in league with the elves. Yet she was now poor, and without aid, save that she was succoured secretly by a kinswoman of Hurin, named Eilerin, whom Broda, an Easterling, had taken as his wife. And Morwen feared greatly that Turin would be taken from her and enslaved. Therefore it came into her heart to send him away in secret, and to beg King Thingol to harbour him, for Beren son of Barahir was her father's kinsman, and he had been moreover a friend of Turin, ere evil befell. Therefore, in the autumn of the year of lamentation, Morwen sent Turin forth over the mountains with 2 aged servants, bidding them find entry, if they could, into the kingdom of Doriath. Thus was the fate of Turin woven, which is full told in that lay that is called Nan y Hain Hurin, the tale of the children of Hurin, and is the longest of all the lays that speak of those days. Here that tale is told in brief, for it is woven with the fate of the Silmarils and of the elves, and it is called the Tale of Grief, for it is sorrowful, and in it are revealed most evil works of Morgoth Baugle. In the first beginning of the year Morwen gave birth to her child, the daughter of Hurin, and she named her Nienor, which is mourning. But Turin and his companions, passing through great perils, came at last to the borders of Doriath, and there they were found by Beleg Strongbow, chief of the march wardens of King Thingol, who led them to Menegroth. Then Thingol received Turin, and took him even to his own fostering, in honour of Hurin the Steadfast, for Thingol's mood was changed towards the houses of the elf friends. Thereafter messengers went north to Hithlum, bidding Morwen leave Dor-Lumen and return with them to Doriath, but still she would not leave the house in which she had dwelt with Hurin. And when the elves departed, she sent with them the dragon helm of Dor-Lumen, greatest of the heirlooms of the house of Hador. Turin grew fair and strong in Doriath, but he was marked with sorrow. For 9 years he dwelt in Thingol's halls, and during that time his grief grew less, for messengers went at times to Hithlum, and returning they brought better tidings of Morwen and Nienor. But there came a day when the messengers did not return out of the north, and Thingol would send no more. Then Turin was filled with fear for his mother and his sister, and in grimness of heart he went before the king and asked for mail and a sword, and he put on the dragon helm of Dor-Lumen, and went out to battle on the marches of Doriath, and became the companion in arms of Beleg Cuthalion. And when 3 years had passed, Turin returned again to Morgoth, but he came from the wild, and was unkempt, and his gear and garment were wayworn. Now one there was in Doriath, of the people of the Nandor, high in the councils of the king. Cyrus was his name. He had long begrudged to Turin the honour he received as Thingol's foster son, and seated opposite to him at the board he taunted him, saying, "If the men of Hithlum are so wild and fell, of what sort are the women of that land? Do they run like deer clad only in their hair?" Then Turin in anger took up a drinking vessel and cast it at Cyrus, and he was grievously hurt. On the next day Cyrus waylaid Turin as he set out from Morgoth to return to the marches, but Turin overcame him and set him to run naked as a hunted beast through the woods. Then Cyrus, fleeing in terror before him, fell into the chasm of a stream, and his body was broken on a great rock in the water. But others coming saw what was done, and Mablung was among them, and he bade Turin return with him to Morgoth and abide the judgment of the king, seeking his pardon. But Turin, deeming himself now an outlaw, and fearing to be held captive, refused Mablung's bidding, and turned swiftly away, and passing through the girdle of Melion he came into the woods west of Sirion. There he joined himself to a band of such houseless and desperate men as could be found in those evil days lurking in the wild, and their hands were turned against all who came in their path, elves and men and orcs. But when all that had befallen was told and searched out before Thingol, the king pardoned Turin, holding him wronged. In that time Beleg Strongbow returned from the north marches and came to Morgoth seeking him, and Thingol spoke to Beleg, saying, "I grieve, Cuthalion, for I took Hurin's son as my son, and so he shall remain, unless Hurin himself should return out of the shadows to claim his own. I would not have any say that Hurin was driven forth unjustly into the wild, and gladly would I welcome him back, for I loved him well." And Beleg answered, "I will seek Turin until I find him, and I will bring him back to Morgoth if I can, for I love him also." Then Beleg departed from Morgoth, and far across Beleriand he sought in vain for tidings of Turin through many perils. But Turin abode long among the outlaws, and became their captain, and he named himself Nathan, the Wronged. Very warily they dwelt in the wooded lands south of Teglin. But when a year had passed since Turin fled from Doriath, Beleg came upon their lair by night. It chanced that at that time Turin was gone from the camp, and the outlaws seized Beleg and bound him, and treated him cruelly, for they feared him as a spy of the king of Doriath. But Turin returning and seeing what was done was stricken with remorse for all their evil and lawless deeds, and he released Beleg, and they renewed their friendship, and Turin forswore thenceforward war or plunder against all save the servants of Angband. Then Beleg told Turin of King Thingol's pardon, and he sought to persuade him by all means that he might return with him to Doriath, saying that there was great need of his strength and valour on the north marches of the realm. "Of late the orcs have found a way down out of Tar Nafuin," he said. "They have made a road through the pass of Anach." "I do not remember it," said Turin. "Never did we go so far from the borders," said Beleg. "But you have seen the peaks of the Chrysagorim far off, and to the east the dark walls of the Gorgoroth. Anach lies between, above the high springs of Mindeb, and a hard and dangerous road, yet many by it now. And Dimbar, which used to be in peace, is falling under the Black Hand, and the men of Brethil are troubled. We are needed there." But in the pride of his heart, Turin refused the pardon of the king, and the words of Beleg were of no avail to change his mood. And he, for his part, urged Beleg to remain with him in the lands west of Sirion. But that Beleg would not do, and he said, "Hard you are, Turin, and stubborn. Now the turn is mine. If you wish indeed to have the strongbow beside you, look for me in Dimbar, for thither I shall return." On the next day Beleg set out, and Turin went with him a bow shot from the camp. But he said nothing. "It is farewell, then, son of Hurin," said Beleg. Then Hurin looked out westward, and he saw far off the great height of Amon Rudh, and unwitting of what lay before him, he answered, "You have said, 'Seek me in Dimbar,' but I say, 'Seek for me on Amon Rudh,' else this is our last farewell." Then they parted, in friendship, yet in sadness. Now Beleg returned to the Thousand Caves, and coming before Thingol and Melion, he told them of all that had befallen, save only of his evil handling by Turin's companions. Then Thingol sighed, and he said, "What more would Turin have me do?" "Give me leave, lord," said Beleg, "and I will guard him and guide him as I may. Then no man shall say that elven words are lightly spoken, nor would I wish to see so great a good run do nothing in the wild." And Thingol gave Beleg leave to do as he would, and he said, "Beleg Guthorion, for many deeds you have earned my thanks, but not the least is the finding of my foster son. At this parting, ask for any gift, and I will not deny you." "Ask then for a sword of worth," said Beleg, "for the orcs come now too thick and close for a blow only, and such blade as I have is no match for their armour." "Choose from all that I have," said Thingol, "save only Ruth, my own." Then Beleg chose Anglachel, and that was a sword of great worth, and it was so named because it was made of iron that fell from heaven as a blazing star. It would cleave all earth-delved iron. One other sword only in Middle-earth was like to it. That sword does not enter into this tale, though it was made of the same ore by the same smith, and that smith was Eol, the dark elf, who took Aredel, Turgon's sister, to wife. He gave Anglachel to Thingol as free, which he begrudged, for leave to dwell in Nan el-Moth. But its mate Anguirel he kept until it was stolen from him by Maeglin, his son. But as Thingol turned the hilt of Anglachel towards Beleg, Melian looked at the blade, and she said, "There is malice in this sword. The dark heart of the smith still dwells in it. It will not love the hand it serves, neither will it abide with you long." "None the less I will wield it while I may," said Beleg. "Another gift I will give to you, Guthorion," said Melian, "that shall be your help in the wild, and the help also of those whom you choose." And she gave him store of lembas, the way-bread of the elves, wrapped in leaves of silver, and the threads that bound it were sealed at the knots with the seal of the queen, a wafer of white wax shaped as a single flower of Telperion. For according to the customs of the Elderlia, the keeping and giving of lembas belonged to the queen alone. In nothing did Melion show greater favour to Turin than in this gift, for the Eldar had never before allowed men to use this way-bread, and seldom did so again. Then Beleg departed with these gifts from Menegroth, and went back to the North Marches, where he had his lodges and many friends. Then in Dimbar the orcs were driven back, and Anglachel rejoiced to be unsheathed. But when the winter came, and war was stilled, suddenly his companions missed Beleg, and he returned to them no more. Now when Beleg parted from the outlaws and returned into Doriath, Turin led them away westward out of Sirion's vale, for they grew weary of their life without rest, ever watchful and in fear of pursuit, and they sought for a safer lair, And it chanced at a time of evening that they came upon 3 dwarfs, who fled before them. But one that lagged behind was seized and thrown down, and a man of the company took his bow and let fly an arrow at the others as they vanished in the dusk. Now the dwarf that they had taken was named MIM, and he pleaded for his life before Turin, and offered as ransom to lead them to his hidden halls, which none might find without his aid. Then Turin pitied MIM, and spared him, and he said, "Where is your house?" Then MIM answered, "High above the lands lies the house of MIM, upon the great hill. Amon is that hill called now, since the elves changed all the names." Then Turin was silent, and he looked long upon the dwarf, and at last he said, "You shall bring us to that place." On the next day they set out thither, following MIM to Amon. Now that hill stood upon the edge of the moorlands that rose between the vales of Sirion and Nargothrond, and high above the stony heath it reared its crown, but its steep grey head was bare, save for the red Saragon that mantled the stone. And as the men of Turin's band drew near, the sun westering broke through the clouds, and fell upon the crown, and the Saragon was all in flower. Then one among them said, "There is blood on the hilltop." But MIM led them by secret paths up the steep slopes of Amon, and at the mouth of his cave he bowed to Turin, saying, "Enter into Bar-en Danwed, the house of ransom, for so it shall be called." And now there came another dwarf bearing light to greet him, and they spoke together, and passed swiftly down into the darkness of the cave. But Turin followed after, and came at length to a chamber far within, lit by dim lamps hanging upon chains. There he found MIM kneeling at a stone couch beside the wall, and he tore his beard, and wailed, crying one name unceasingly, and on the couch there lay a third. But Turin entering stood beside MIM, and offered him aid. Then MIM looked up at him, and said, "You can give no aid, for this is Kim, my son, and he is dead, pierced by an arrow. He died at sunset, even my son has told me." Then pity rose in Turin's heart, and he said to MIM, "Alas, I would recall that shaft if I could. Now Bar-en Danwid, this house shall be called in truth, and if ever I come to any wealth, I will pay you a ransom of gold for your son, in token of sorrow, though it gladden your heart no more." Then MIM rose, and looked long at Turin. "I hear you," he said. "You speak like a dwarf lord of old, and at that I marvel. Now my heart is cooled, though it is not glad, and in this house you may dwell if you will, for I will pay my ransom." So began the abiding of Turin in the hidden house of MIM upon Amon, and he walked on the green sward before the mouth of the cave, and looked out east and west and north. Northward he looked and descried the forest of Brethil, climbing green about Amon in its midst, and thither his eyes were drawn ever and again, he knew not why, for his heart was set rather to the northwest, where league upon league away on the skirts of the sky it seemed to him that he could glimpse the mountains of shadow, the walls of his home. But at evening Turin looked west into the sunset, as the sun rode down red into the hazes above the distant coasts, and the vale of Nargothrond lay deep in the shadows between. In that time that followed, Turin spoke much with MIM, and sitting with him alone he listened to his lore and the tale of his life. For MIM came of dwarves that were banished in ancient days from the great dwarf cities of the east, and long before the return of Morgoth they wandered westward into Beleriand. But they became diminished in stature and in smithcraft, and they took to lives of stealth, walking with bowed shoulders and furtive steps. Before the dwarves of Nargothrond and Beleg came west over the mountains, the elves of Beleriand knew not what these others were, and they hunted them and slew them. But afterwards they let them alone, and they were called Noigeth, Nibin, the petty dwarves, in the Sindarin tongue. They loved none but themselves, and if they feared and hated the orcs, they hated the Eldar no less, and the exiles most of all. For the Noldor, they said, had stolen their lands and their homes. Long ere King Finrod Felagund came over the sea, the caves of Nargothrond were discovered by them, and by them its delving was begun. And beneath the crown of Amon, the bold hill, the slow hands of the petty dwarves had bored and deepened the caves through the long years that they dwelt there, untroubled by the grey elves of the woods. But now at last they had dwindled and died out of Middle-earth, all save MIM and his 2 sons. And MIM was old even in the reckoning of dwarves, old and forgotten. And in his halls the smithies were idle, and the axes rusted, and their name was remembered only in ancient tales of Doriath and Nargothrond. But when the year drew on to midwinter, snow came down from the north heavier than they had known it in the river vales, and Amon was covered deep, and they said that the winters worsened in Beleriand as the power of Angband grew. Then only the hardiest dared stir abroad, and some fell sick, and all were pinched with hunger. But in the dim dusk of a winter's day there appeared suddenly among them a man, as it seemed, of great bulk and girth, cloaked and hooded in white, and he walked up to the fire without a word. And when men sprang up in fear, he laughed and threw back his hood, and beneath his wide cloak he bore a great pack. And in the light of the fire Turin looked again on the face of Beleg Cutharian. Thus Beleg returned once more to Turin, and their meeting was glad. And with him he brought out of Dimbar the dragon helm of Dolomin, thinking that it might lift Turin's thought again above his life in the wilderness as the leader of a petty company. But still Turin would not return to Doriath, and Beleg, yielding to his love against his wisdom, remained with him, and did not depart. And at that time he laboured much for the good of Turin's company. Those that were hurt or sick he tended, and gave to them the lembas of Melian, and they were quickly healed. Though the grey elves were less in skill and knowledge than the exiles from Valinor, in the ways of the life of Middle-earth they had a wisdom beyond the reach of men. And because Beleg was strong and enduring, far-sighted in mind as in eye, he came to be held in honour among the outlaws. But the hatred of MIM for the elf that had come into Bar and Danwed grew ever greater, and he sat with Ibn, his son, in the deepest shadows of his house, speaking to none. But Turin paid now little heed to the dwarf, and when winter passed and spring came, they had sterner work to do. Who knows now the counsels of Morgoth? Who can measure the reach of his thought? Who had been Melkor, mighty among the Ainur of the great song, and sat now a dark lord upon a dark throne in the north, weighing in his malice all the tidings that came to him, and perceiving more of the deeds and purposes of his enemies than even the wisest of them feared, save only Melian the queen. To her often the thought of Morgoth reached out, and there was foiled. And now again the might of Angband was moved. And as the long fingers of a groping hand the forerunners of his armies probed the ways into Beleriand, through Anach they came, and Dimbar was taken, and all the north marches of Doriath. Down the ancient road they came that led through the long defile of Sirion, past the isle where Minas Tirith of Finrod had stood, and so through the land between Malduin and Sirion, and on through the eaves of Brethu to the crossings of Teglin. Thence the road went on into the guarded plain, but the orcs did not go far upon it as yet, for there dwelt now in the wild a terror that was hidden, and upon the red hill were watchful eyes of which they had not been warned. For Turin put on again the helm of Hedor, and far and wide in Beleriand the whisper went under wood and over stream, and through the passes of the hills, saying that the helm and bow that had fallen in Dimbar had arisen again beyond hope. Then many who went leaderless, disposed but undaunted, took heart again, and came to seek the two captains. Dor Cuarthol, the land of bow and helm, was in that time named all the region between Tegelin and the west march of Doriath, and Turin named himself anew Gorthol, the dread helm, and his heart was high again. In Menegroth and in the deep halls of Nargothrond, and even in the hidden realm of Gondolin, the fame of the deeds of the two captains was heard, and in Egband also they were known. Then Morgoth laughed, for now by the dragon helm was Hurin's son revealed to him again, and ere long Amon was ringed with spies. In the waning of the year, MIM the Dwarf and Ibn his son went out from Bar en Danwed to gather roots in the wild for their winter store, and they were taken captive by orcs. Then for a second time MIM promised to guide his enemies by the secret paths to his home on Amon. But yet he sought to delay the fulfillment of his promise, and demanded that Gorthol should not be slain. Then the orc captain laughed, and he said to MIM, "Assuredly Turin, son of Hurin, shall not be slain." Thus was Bar en Danwed betrayed, for the orcs came upon it by night at unawares, guided by MIM. There many of Turin's company were slain as they slept, but some fleeing by an inner stair came out upon the hilltop, and there they fought until they fell, and their blood flowed out upon the Saragon that mantled the stone. But a net was cast over Turin as he fought, and he was enmeshed in it, and overcome, and led away. And at length, when all was silent again, MIM crept out of the shadows of his house, and as the sun rose over the mists of Sirion, he stood beside the dead men on the hilltop. But he perceived that not all those that lay there were dead, for by one his gaze was returned, and he looked in the eyes of Beleg the elf. Then with hatred long stored MIM stepped up to Beleg, and drew forth the sword Anglachel, that lay beneath the body of one that had fallen beside him. But Beleg stumbling up seized back the sword and thrust it at the dwarf, and MIM in terror fled wailing from the hilltop. And Beleg cried after him, "The vengeance of the house of Hedor will find you yet." Now Beleg was sorely wounded, but he was mighty among the elves of Middle-earth, and he was moreover a master of healing. Therefore he did not die, and slowly his strength returned, and he sought in vain among the dead for Turin to bury him. But he found him not, and then he knew that Hurin's son was yet alive, and taken to Engband. With little hope Beleg departed from Amon, and set out northwards towards the crossing of Teglin, following in the track of the orcs, and he crossed over the Brithiach, and journeyed through Dimbar towards the pass of Anach. And now he was not far behind them, for he went without sleeping, whereas they had tarried on their road, hunting in the lands and fearing no pursuit as they came northward. And not even in the dreadful woods of Tardnafuin did he swerve from the trail, for the skill of Beleg was greater than any that have been in Middle-earth. But as he passed by night through that evil land, he came upon one lying asleep at the foot of a great dead tree, and Beleg, staying his steps beside the sleeper, saw that it was an elf. Then he spoke to him, and gave him limbus, and asked him what fate had brought him to that terrible place, and he named himself Gwyndor, son of Gwilyn. Grieving, Beleg looked upon him, for Gwyndor was now but a bent and fearful shadow of his former shape and mood. When in the near Niath Arnodia that lord of Nargothrond rode with rash courage to the very doors of England, and there was taken. For few of the Noldor whom Morgoth captured were put to death because of their skill in forging and in mining for metals and gems, and Gwyndor was not slain, but put to labour in the mines of the north. By secret tunnels known only to themselves the mining elves might sometimes escape, and thus it came to pass that Beleg found him, spent and bewildered in the mazes of Turin. And Gwyndor told him that as he lay and lurked among the trees he saw a great company of orcs passing northwards, and wolves went with them, and among them was a man whose hands were chained, and they drove him onward with whips. Very tall he was, said Gwyndor, as tall as are the men from the misty hills of Hithlum. Then Beleg told him of his own errand in Turin, and Gwyndor sought to dissuade him from his quest, saying that he would but join Turin in the anguish that awaited him. But Beleg would not abandon Turin, and despairing himself he aroused hope again in Gwyndor's heart, and together they went on, following the orcs until they came out of the forest on the high slopes that ran down to the barren dunes of Anglachel. There, within sight of the peaks of Thangorodrim, the orcs made their encampment, and a bare dell as the light of day was falling, and setting wolf sentinels all about they fell to carousing. A great storm rode up out of the west, and lightning glittered on the shadowy mountains far away, as Beleg and Gwyndor crept towards the dell. When all in the camp was sleeping, Beleg took his bow, and in the darkness shot the wolf sentinels one by one, and silently. Then in great peril they entered in, and they found Turin fettered hand and foot, and tied to a withered tree, and all about him knives that had been cast at him were embedded in the trunk, and he was senseless in a sleep of great weariness. But Beleg and Gwyndor cut the bonds that held him, and lifting him they carried him out of the dell. Yet they could not bear him no further than to a thicket of thorn trees a little way above. There they laid him down, and now the storm drew very near. Beleg drew his sword Anglachel, and with it he cut the fetters that bound Turin. But fate was that day more strong, for the blade slipped as he cut the shackles, and Turin's foot was pricked. Then he was roused into a sudden wakefulness of rage and fear, and seeing one bending over him with naked blade, he leapt up with a great cry, believing that orcs would come again to torment him, and grappling with him in the darkness he seized Anglachel, and slew Beleg Cuthalion, thinking him a foe. But as he stood finding himself free, and ready to sell his life dearly against imagined foes, there came a great flash of lightning above them, and in its light he looked down on Beleg's face. Then Turin stood stone still and silent, staring on that dreadful death, knowing what he had done, and so terrible was his face, lit by the lightning that flickered all about them, that Gwyndor cowered down upon the ground and dared not raise his eyes. But now in the dell beneath the orcs were roused, and all the camp was in a tumult, for they feared the thunder that came out of the west, believing that it was sent against them by the great enemies beyond the sea. Then a wind arose, and great rains fell, and torrents swept down from the heights of Turin, And though Gwyndor cried out to Turin, warning him of their utmost peril, he made no answer, but sat unmoving and unweeping in the tempest beside the body of Beleg. When morning came, the storm was passed away eastward over Lothlin, and the sun of autumn rose hot and bright. But believing that Turin would have fled far away from that place, and all trace of his flight be washed away, the orcs departed in haste without long search, and far off Gwyndor saw them marching away over the steaming sands of Anfauglith. Thus it came to pass that they returned to Morgoth empty-handed, and left behind them the son of Hurin, who sat crazed and unwitting on the slopes of Tar Nifuin, bearing a burden heavier than their bonds. Then Gwyndor roused Turin to aid him in the burial of Beleg, and he rose as one that walked in sleep, and together they laid Beleg in a shallow grave, and placed beside him Belthronding his great bow, that was made of black yew wood. But the dread sword Anglachel Gwyndor took, saying that it were better that it should take vengeance on the servants of Morgoth than lie useless in the earth. And he took also the lembus of Melion to strengthen them in the wild. Thus ended Beleg's strongbow, truest of friends, greatest in skill of all that harboured in the woods of Beleriand in the older days, at the hand of him whom he most loved. And that grief was graven on the face of Turin, and never faded. But courage and strength were renewed in the elf of Nargothrond, and departing from Tar Nifuin, he led Turin far away. Never once as they wandered together on long and grievous paths did Turin speak, and he walked as one without wish or purpose, while the year waned and winter drew on over the northern lands. But Gwyndor was ever beside him to guard him and guide him. And thus they passed westward over Sirion, and came at length to Eithel Ivrin, the springs whence Narog rose beneath the mountains of shadow. There Gwyndor spoke to Turin, saying, "Awake, son of Hurin, Thalion. On Ivrin's lake is endless laughter. She is fed from crystal fountains unfailing, and guarded from defilement by Umo, lord of waters, who wrought her beauty in ancient days." Then Turin knelt and drank from that water, and suddenly he cast himself down, and his tears were unloosed at last, and he was healed of his madness. There he made a song for Beleg, and he named it Laia Cu Beleg, the song of the great bow, singing it aloud, heedless of peril. And Gwyndor gave the sword Anglachel into his hands, and Turin knew that it was heavy and strong, and had great power, but its blade was black and dull, and its edges blunt. Then Gwyndor said, "This is a strange blade, and unlike any that I have seen in Middle-earth. It mourns for Beleg even as you do. But be comforted, for I return to Nargothrond of the house of Hanafen, and you shall come with me, and be healed and renewed." "Who are you?" said Turin. "A wandering elf, a thrall escaped, whom Beleg met and comforted," said Gwyndor. "Yet once I was Gwyndor, son of Gwilyn, a lord of Nargothrond, until I went to the Nirnaeth Arnodiad, and was enslaved in Engband." "Then you have seen Hurin, son of Galdor, the warrior of Dor-lómin?" said Turin. "I have not seen him," said Gwyndor, "but rumour of him runs through Engband, that he still defies Morgoth, and Morgoth has laid a curse upon him and all his kin." "That I do believe," said Turin. And now they arose, and departing from Eithel Ifrin, they journeyed southward along the banks of Narog, until they were taken by scouts of the elves and brought as prisoners to the hidden stronghold. Thus did Turin come to Nargothrond. At first his own people did not know Gwyndor, who went out young and strong, and returned now seeming as one of the aged among mortal men, because of his torments and his labours. But Finduilas, daughter of Orodreth the king, knew him, and welcomed him, for she had loved him before the near Naiath, and so greatly did Gwyndor love her beauty, that he named her Faelifrin, which is the gleam of the sun on the pools of Ifrin. For Gwyndor's sake, Turin was admitted with him into Nargothrond, and he dwelt there in honour. But when Gwyndor would tell his name, Turin checked him, saying, I am Agarwine, the son of Umarth, which is the blood-stained son of ill fate, a hunter in the woods. And the elves of Nargothrond questioned him no more. In the time that followed, Turin grew high in favour with Orodreth, and well nigh all hearts were turned to him in Nargothrond. For he was young, and only now reached his full manhood, and he was in truth the son of Morwen Eledwin to look upon, dark-haired and pale-skinned, with grey eyes, and his face more beautiful than any other among mortal men in the older days. His speech and bearing were that of the ancient kingdom of Doriath, and even among the elves he might be taken for one from the great houses of the Noldor. Therefore many called him Adanhedel, the Elfman. The sword Anglachel was forged anew for him by cunning smiths of Nargothrond, and though ever black its edge shone with pale fire, and he named it Gurthang, Iron of Death. So great was his prowess and skill in warfare on the confines of the guarded plain that he himself became known as Mormogel, the Blacksword. And the elves said, the Mormogel cannot be slain, save by mischance or an evil arrow from afar. Therefore they gave him dwarf mail to guard him, and in a grim mood he found also in the armories a dwarf mask all gilded, and he put it on before battle, and his enemies fled before his face. Then the heart of Finduilas was turned from Gwyndor, and against her will her love was given to Turin. But Turin did not perceive what had befallen, and being torn in heart, Finduilas became sorrowful, and she grew wan and silent. But Gwyndor sat in dark thought, and on a time he spoke to Finduilas, saying, Daughter of the house of Finarfin, let no grief lie between us, for though Morgoth has laid my life in ruin, you still I love. Go whither love leads you, yet beware, it is not fitting that the elder children of Iluvatar should wed with the younger, nor is it wise, for they are brief, and soon pass, to leave us in widowhood while the world lasts. Neither will fate suffer it, unless it be once or twice only, for some high cause of doom that we do not perceive. But this man is not barren. A doom indeed lies on him, as seeing eyes may well read in him, but a dark doom. Enter not into it, and if you will, your love shall betray you to bitterness and death. For hearken to me, though he be indeed Agarwine, son of Umarth, his right name is Turin, son of Hurin, whom Morgoth holds in Engband, and whose kin he has cursed. Doubt not the power of Morgoth Baugle. Is it not written in me? Then Finduilas sat long in thought, but at the last she said only, Turin, son of Hurin, loves me not, nor will. Now when Turin learnt from Finduilas of what had passed, he was wrathful, and he said to Gwyndor, In love I hold you for rescue and safe keeping, but now you have done ill to me, friend, to betray my right name, and call my doom upon me, from which I would lie hid. But Gwyndor answered, The doom lies in yourself, not in your name. When it became known to Orodreth that the Mormogil was in truth the son of Turin Thalion, he gave him great honour, and Turin became mighty among the people of Nargothrond. But he had no liking for their manner of warfare, of ambush, and stealth, and secret arrow, and he yearned for brave strokes and battle in the open, and his counsels weighed with the king ever the longer the more. In those days the elves of Nargothrond forsook their secrecy and went openly to battle, and great store of weapons were made, and by the counsel of Turin the Noldor built a mighty bridge over the Narog from the doors of Felagund, for the swifter passage of their arms. Then the servants of England were driven out of all the land between Narog and Sirion eastward and westward to the Nenning and the desolate Falas. And though Gwyndor spoke ever against Turin in the council of the king, holding it an ill policy, he fell into dishonour, and none heeded him, for his strength was small, and he was no longer forward in arms. Thus Nargothrond was revealed to the wrath and hatred of Morgoth. But still at Turin's prayer his true name was not spoken, and though the fame of his deed came into Doriath, and to the ears of Thingol, rumour spoke only of the black sword of Nargothrond.